You want to lock me in a cabin with a man nobody in this town trusts? Ellen Reed's voice was steel-wrapped in ice. A suspected outlaw, a stranger, for days. Sheriff Hale didn't flinch. The storm doesn't care about your objections, Ellen. Your roof won't hold it. Across the room, Cole Hart stood with his saddlebag and said nothing. He'd heard every whisper since he rode into Larkspur Gulch. He knew what this town thought of him. And now he was looking at a woman who clearly wanted nothing to do with him and feeling for the first time in 3 years like he'd finally met someone who understood exactly what it meant to be refused by a place you never asked to belong to. If this story already has you hooked, hit that subscribe button and follow along till the very end and drop a comment telling me what city you're watching from. I want to see just how far this story has traveled. The storekeeper, a thick-armed man named Gerald Potts, took the coins without making eye contact. He counted them twice, as if Cole might have slipped a slug in among the real ones. Then he bagged the flour and salt and slid them across the counter like he was feeding something he didn't want to get too close to. "Anything else?" Gerald said. "Coffee," Cole said. "If you have it." Gerald turned to the shelf behind him. Cole noticed the man's shoulders were pulled up tight, nearly to his ears. The whole room still hadn't moved. 2 men near the wood stove had turned their bodies just slightly, not facing him, but no longer facing away. Cole recognized the posture. He'd been seeing it for 3 years in every town he passed through. It was the posture of men deciding whether or not they needed to do something about him. He took his bag, nodded once at nobody in particular, and walked back out into the cold. The wind hit him like a flat hand to the chest. December in the mountains didn't negotiate. It simply arrived, and you either handled it or you didn't. Cole pulled his collar up and stood for a moment outside the store, listening to the sound of conversation slowly creeping back to life through the window behind him. He could make out a few words without trying. "That him? Same one who was near Silver Creek when the payroll went missing. Can't prove nothing, but still." Cole started walking toward the livery stable. He didn't look back. He hadn't robbed the Silver Creek payroll. He hadn't even been in Silver Creek when it happened, not exactly. He'd been 10 miles east of it, camped alone near a creek crossing when the whole mess went down. But he'd been seen riding out of the area 2 days later, and that was enough for the story to attach itself to him like a burr. It followed him from Caldwell to Red Mesa to Harlan's Crossing, and now here to Larkspur Gulch, where he'd hoped foolishly. He understood now that maybe the story hadn't arrived first. It always arrived first. He found the livery and paid for a stall for his horse, a rust-colored mare named Bess, who had more sense than most people he knew. He gave her water and some grain and stood beside her for a moment, one hand on her neck, just listening to her breathe. "One more night," he told her quietly. "Then we figure out where next." Bess didn't answer. She rarely did. But she leaned into his hand slightly, and that was enough. He was eating alone at the far end of the Larkspur Gulch Saloon, which served food during the day, though calling it food was generous, when the first man came to sit across from him uninvited. Edwin Pike was not a large man, but he carried himself like one. He had the kind of face that had probably been handsome once before. Years of small cruelties had worked their way into the lines around his mouth. He sat down, folded his hands on the table, and looked at Cole the way a man looks at something he's already decided he doesn't want in his town. "You planning to stay long?" Pike said. Cole swallowed a bite of salt pork. Hadn't decided. "Let me help you decide." Pike kept his voice pleasant. "We don't have need for your kind of trouble here." "What kind is that?" "The Silver Creek kind." Cole set his fork down. He looked at Pike carefully, at the clean hands, the pressed shirt, despite the cold, the small gold pin on his lapel that suggested he was either on the town council or wanted people to think he was. "I didn't rob Silver Creek," Cole said. "Lot of men say that about a lot of things." "That's true. Doesn't change what I did or didn't do." Pike leaned forward slightly. "I've got business interests in this town, respectable business, the kind that depends on people feeling safe. You understand what I'm telling you?" You want me gone. I want you thinking seriously about what's best for everyone. Cole picked his fork back up. I'll think about it. Pike waited a moment as if expecting something more. When nothing came, he stood slowly, straightened his jacket, and walked away without another word. Cole watched him go. Then he looked down at his plate and realized he'd lost his appetite. It was the schoolteacher who caught his attention first, not because she was trying to, but because she was the only person in Larkspur Gulch who looked at him without flinching. He saw her the next morning crossing the main street with an armload of books moving fast against the wind. She wasn't young in the way that turned heads. She was somewhere in her late 20s, with dark eyes and a set to her jaw that suggested she hadn't asked for anyone's opinion and didn't intend to start. She walked past the spot where Cole was tying Bess to a post, and she glanced at him once direct measuring, and then looked away, and kept walking. She didn't hurry, she didn't flinch, she just looked. He found out her name from the man who ran the livery, an older fellow named Amos, who seemed to have the least invested in town politics, and therefore the most willing to talk. Ellen Reed, Amos said, forking hay without looking up. Schoolteacher, widow. Her husband passed about 4 years back, some kind of fever if I remember right. She's been alone since. She from here originally. No, came out from Ohio, taught school for 2 years before she married James Reed. After he died, she just stayed. Didn't have anywhere better to go, I suppose. Or maybe she just didn't want to give anyone the satisfaction of watching her leave. Cole thought about that. What do people say about her? Amos finally looked up. There was something careful in his expression. People say a lot of things they shouldn't. You know how towns are. She's a woman alone, and she doesn't ask for help, and she doesn't smile at the right people, and that bothers folk more than it should. What do they call her? Amos went back to his work. Old Maid, he said with a flatness that made it clear he found the term contemptible. Which is about the cruelest thing you can call a woman who just decided to live on her own terms. Cole was quiet for a moment. Then he said, Seems like she and I have something in common. Amos looked at him again. This time something almost like a smile moved at the corner of his mouth. I'd say you're both smart enough to know it, and stubborn enough not to let it show. Mate. The storm came the way the worst storms always come, with enough warning that everyone knew it was coming, and not enough time to do anything sensible about it. By mid-afternoon, the sky had gone the color of old pewter. The wind had picked up steadily since morning, and now it moved through the gaps in the buildings with a sound like something looking for a way in. The temperature had dropped 10 degrees since noon, and showed no sign of stopping. Cole was in the livery checking Bess's shoes when Sheriff Douglas Hale came in. Hale was a compact, gray-haired man who wore his authority quietly, not like a flag, but like a tool he kept close to hand. He looked at Cole without particular hostility, which put him ahead of most of the town. You need to know what's coming, Hale said without preamble. This isn't a regular snow. There's a mountain storm rolling in from the north. We've seen these before. Last time we had one this bad, the pass was closed for 11 days, and we lost 2 men who tried to ride it out in the wrong place. Cole straightened up from Bess's hoof. I'll stay in town, find a room somewhere. That's the other problem. Hale took off his hat, turned it in his hands. The boarding house is full. Mabel Krause took in 3 families from the Eastern Ridge who came down when they heard the weather coming. Every room is full. Same with the saloon. I've already got 4 men sleeping on the floor there. Cole waited. He could tell from the way Hale was turning his hat that there was more coming. There's a ranger cabin, Hale said, about 1.5 miles north. Built solid, good wood stove, enough stores to last 2 weeks if you're careful. I've sent men up there in bad weather before. It holds. He paused. Trouble is, I've already got someone else who needs it. Who? Hale met his eyes. Ellen Reed. The schoolteacher's place is at the edge of town, east-facing bad exposure. In a storm this size, the roof could go. She can't stay there. The silence between them lasted about 4 seconds. You're suggesting we share the cabin? Cole said. I'm telling you it's the only option I've got. What does she say about it? For the first time, something moved in Hale's expression that might have been humor. "You can ask her yourself. She's at the dry goods store right now. I'm heading there next." Cole looked at Bess. Then he looked at the sky through the livery door, and what he saw there settled the argument before it started. The clouds were moving fast now, heavy and low, with that particular shade of gray that meant business. "Fine," he said. Hale nodded. "I'll tell her." "Sheriff?" Cole stopped him before he could turn. "She's not going to like it, son," Hale said, settling his hat back on his head. "She's going to hate it, but she's practical enough to know when she doesn't have a choice." Then he heard her before he saw her. She was standing outside the dry goods store when Cole came up the street, and she was speaking to Sheriff Hale in a voice that was controlled and precise, and about 3 degrees colder than the air around her. "I understand the necessity," she was saying. "I want you to understand that I'm only agreeing because the alternative is watching my roof cave in." "That's all I'm asking," Hale said. "I'm not asking for a chaperone Douglas. I'm not asking to be looked after. I am a grown woman who has survived 4 winters alone, and I don't need—" She stopped when Cole came within earshot. She looked at him with those direct dark eyes, and for a moment neither of them spoke. Then she said flatly, "You're the man everyone thinks robbed Silver Creek." "That's the rumor," Cole said. "Did you—" He met her gaze straight. "No." She studied him for a moment, not suspiciously, but analytically, like she was reading a text and deciding what she thought of it. Then she looked back at Hale. "How long?" she said. "Till the storm breaks. Could be 3 days. Could be a week. I won't know until it's here." Ellen Reed pressed her lips together briefly. Then she said, "I need to get my things from the house, and I'm taking my rifle." "Good," Cole said before he could stop himself. She looked at him again. "Good. A rifle seems smart given the weather." For just a second, the barest fraction of a moment, something shifted in her expression. Not warmth exactly. More like the slight recalibration of an opinion. Then it was gone, and she was back to practical. "I'll meet you at the North Trail head in an hour," she said. And she walked away without waiting for a response. Hale looked at Cole. Cole looked at Hale. "She's something," Cole said. "She really is," Hale agreed. "Try not to make her angry." Mrs. Thornton caught Ellen before she made it back to her house. She came out of the alley between the milliner and the post office like she'd been lying in wait, which Ellen privately suspected she had. Agnes Thornton was 63 years old, had buried 2 husbands, and had appointed herself the moral authority of Larkspur Gulch approximately 15 years ago without anyone asking her to. "Ellen Reed," Mrs. Thornton said, falling into step beside her like a woman who expected to be listened to. "I have heard the most disturbing thing." "I'm in a hurry, Agnes." "You cannot stay in that cabin with that man. Do you understand what people will say? A widow and a stranger, a suspected criminal, alone together for days. Your reputation—" "My reputation," Ellen said, not slowing her pace, "is already exactly what this town has made it. I don't think a blizzard is going to improve or damage it significantly." "Ellen." Mrs. Thornton grabbed her arm. Ellen stopped. She turned and looked at the hand on her arm with a calm so complete it was almost frightening. Mrs. Thornton let go. "I'm trying to help you," she said, and to her credit she sounded like she believed it. "I know you are," Ellen said. "And I'm telling you that my choices are a warm cabin or a collapsed roof. I'm choosing the cabin. The man will sleep on one side of it, and I will sleep on the other, and we will both survive the storm, and then we will come back to town, and everything will be exactly as it was. You don't know what kind of man he is." "I don't know what kind of man anyone is," Ellen said quietly. "That's the honest truth of it. Now I have to go pack before the storm gets here." She started walking again. "Tell your friends I said hello." She didn't look back. Inside her house, moving quickly and efficiently, Ellen packed what she needed, and not one thing more. Blankets, a change of clothing. her medical kit she'd learned enough in James's illness to make her useful in emergencies. A book, because she refused to spend a week in silence with nothing but the wind for company. And the rifle loaded, which she carried like a woman who knew exactly what she was doing with it. She stood for a moment in the middle of her small front room before she left. It wasn't much a table. 2 chairs. The shelf of books that was her only real luxury. The wood stove that she knew she'd come back to find cold and sullen when the storm passed. James's photograph was on the shelf. She looked at it for a moment. "I know," she said to the photograph and to no one. "It's not ideal." Then she picked up her pack and her rifle and walked out into the rising wind. Cole was waiting at the trailhead with Bess loaded and ready. He'd brought what he had, which wasn't much: his bedroll, his own kit, some extra ammunition. He looked at her rifle when she came up, and he nodded once with what appeared to be genuine approval. "You know how to use it?" he asked. "Better than you probably," she said. He almost smiled. "Probably." They started up the trail without any more conversation. The wind was already strong enough to lean into, and the first thin scatterings of snow were coming in sideways. Bess picked her way carefully on the frozen ground. Ellen walked without complaint, which Cole noted, and filed away. They didn't speak for the first half-mile. The trail was steep enough to demand attention, and the cold demanded the rest. But Cole was aware of her presence beside him, in the particular way you became aware of something unexpected, not intrusively just present, taking up space in his attention in a way he hadn't anticipated. At one point the trail narrowed and he held a branch back so it didn't whip into her face. She ducked under it, and as she passed close to him she said, "Thank you," without inflection. Not warm, not cold. Just matter-of-fact, like courtesy was a thing she did on principle, without particularly meaning it to mean anything. He found himself wondering what it would sound like when she actually meant something. The cabin was better than he'd expected. Solid logs, good construction, a wood stove that was cold but intact, a stack of firewood in the corner that someone had had the good sense to leave there. 2 sets of bunks on opposite walls. A small table. 1 window shuttered from outside. Ellen went directly to the wood stove and began to work on starting a fire. She moved with the efficiency of someone who had built her own fires for years and needed no instruction on the subject. Cole unsaddled Bess and got her settled in the small lean-to attached to the back of the cabin, then came back inside and started stacking more wood near the stove so they wouldn't have to go outside for it once the storm hit in full. They worked around each other without speaking. Not awkwardly, just carefully. Like 2 people who understood that the space was small and the situation was what it was, and complaining about it wouldn't improve either. When the fire was going and the cabin began to warm, Ellen sat down at the table and looked at him directly. "I want to say something," she said. "All right. I don't know you. You don't know me. Whatever the town thinks about either one of us, I'd like us to agree to set that aside and focus on getting through this storm without driving each other insane. Can we do that?" Cole sat down on the opposite bunk. "We can do that." "Good." She looked at the fire for a moment. "I'm going to ask you one thing and then I won't ask again." "Go ahead." She met his eyes. "Were you involved with the Silver Creek robbery at all, even on the edges of it?" The question was quiet and direct and completely without malice. It was the question of someone who wanted facts, not drama. "No," Cole said. "I was camped east of there, alone. When I rode through afterward, I saw some of the aftermath, and I kept moving because I knew exactly what it would look like to be seen near it. Which turned out to be exactly as bad as I thought." She held his gaze for a moment. Then she nodded once and looked back at the fire. "All right," she said. "That's enough." Outside, the storm arrived. It hit the cabin like a freight train, finding a wall, the full weight of it, slamming into the logs, the sound of wind going from loud to something beyond loud, something physical that you felt in your chest. The shuttered window rattled. Snow found every gap and hissed through it. The temperature in the cabin, just beginning to rise, seemed to hesitate. Cole moved to add more wood to the stove. Ellen pulled her blanket tighter without making a production of it. Neither of them said anything. But Cole noticed in the small silence between the roar of the wind and the crackle of the fire that she had set her rifle against the wall within easy reach. Not pointed at him, just available. He respected that more than he could quite put into words. He set his own saddlebag near his bunk, close enough to reach in the dark, and looked across the cabin at this stranger he'd been locked in with by weather and circumstance, and the particular cruelty of small-town logic. She was reading her book, or pretending to. The firelight moved across her face. Outside, the storm howled like something that had been waiting a long time to get loose. Cole lay back on his bunk and closed his eyes. For the first time in a long time, he wasn't thinking about Silver Creek. He was thinking that whatever the next few days held, at least he wasn't facing them alone. And strangely, inexplicably, in the middle of the worst storm in 3 years, locked in a cabin with a woman who barely knew his name, that felt like something close to solid ground. The storm didn't let up by morning. Cole knew it before he opened his eyes. He could hear it, the particular pitch of wind that meant it had settled in for days, not hours. The kind of sound that changed how you thought about time. Not minutes and hours anymore. Just the storm, and before the storm, and whenever the storm decided to be done. He lay still for a moment listening. The fire had burned low but not out. He'd woken twice in the night to feed it, moving quietly, so he didn't disturb her. The second time, he'd looked across the cabin and seen her asleep on her bunk, one hand curled near her face, her rifle still leaning against the wall where she'd put it. She looked younger when she was sleeping. The controlled, careful expression she wore like armor was gone, and what was underneath was just a woman who was tired. He'd looked away quickly and fed the fire and gone back to his bunk. Now he sat up, rubbed his face, and got the stove going properly before she woke. It wasn't a kind gesture exactly. It was just what needed doing, and he was already awake. He heard her stir behind him. "How bad?" she said. Her voice was still rough with sleep, which surprised him. Somehow made her sound human in a way the armored daytime version hadn't quite allowed. "Bad enough," he said. "We're not going anywhere today." A pause. Then the sound of her sitting up, blankets shifting. "I'll make coffee." "I was going to—" "I'll make the coffee," she said again, in a tone that made it clear this wasn't negotiation. He moved aside and let her at the small iron pot without comment. They moved around each other in the tight space with the careful choreography of people who had decided without saying so that politeness was going to be their first and most important survival strategy. Not warmth, not friendship, just the basic courtesy of not making a hard situation harder. She made the coffee strong enough to stand a spoon in which Cole found he had no objection to whatsoever. They sat at the small table with their cups and listened to the storm batter the logs and said nothing for a while. It was Ellen who broke it. "How long have you been running from Silver Creek?" He looked at her over his cup. 3 years. That's a long time to carry something you didn't do. Rumors got faster legs than the truth. That's not a new problem. She turned her cup in her hands. "No, it isn't." She said it with a weight that told him she wasn't just agreeing philosophically. "What do they say about you?" he asked. The real version, not what you'd tell the sheriff. She was quiet long enough that he thought she might not answer. Then she said, "That I'm proud. That I think I'm better than I am. That I refused good offers of help after James died because I couldn't stand to be beholden." She took a sip. "Most of which is true, actually. I just don't think those are the sins they seem to think they are." "They're not sins at all," Cole said. She looked at him. "Easy for you to say." "I've been called worse things than proud." "What do you call yourself?" The question landed flat on the table between them without sharpness, just genuine curiosity. Cole thought about it honestly. "Careful," he said finally. "I call myself careful. I learned early that people make up their minds about you fast, and once they have, you can't talk them out of it. So I stopped trying. I just move quiet and keep to myself and try not to give anyone more ammunition than they already have." "And how's that working out for you?" He almost laughed. It came up in him, suddenly surprised him. He controlled it, but just barely. and he could tell she noticed because something shifted at the corner of her mouth. "About as well as your strategy of refusing to care what anyone thinks," he said. "My strategy works fine," she said. "Does it?" "It keeps me sane, that's enough." He looked at her for a moment. "Is it?" She didn't answer that one. She looked at the fire instead, and he had the sense that he'd hit something real, something she wasn't ready to look at directly, and he respected it enough not to push. "More coffee," he said. "Yes," she said. "Thank you." By afternoon, they'd established a rhythm without discussing it. Cole handled the wood, checking the supply, keeping the stove fed, reinforcing the lean-to door where the wind kept threatening to rip it open. Ellen managed the food, taking inventory of what was in the cabin stores and calculating what they had and what they needed to be careful with. She did this with a precision that impressed him, laying it out matter-of-factly on the table. "We have enough for 10 days if we're not wasteful," she said. 12 if we're disciplined. Salt pork, dried beans, cornmeal, some canned tomatoes. It's not elegant, but it'll keep us." "I've eaten worse," Cole said. "So have I." She paused. "There's whiskey." "Whose?" "The Ranger's, I'd imagine. Left behind." She held up a half-full bottle. "I propose we treat it as medicinal and ration it accordingly." "What counts as medicinal?" "Cold evenings," she said without missing a beat. "Bad days, and the moment one of us starts getting on the other's nerves." "At what point do we start?" She set the bottle on the shelf. "I'll let you know." It was the closest thing to humor either of them had managed, and it sat between them like a small, careful thing, not quite friendship yet, but the first suggestion of what friendship might eventually look like. Outside, the storm went on and on. The trouble started the second evening, and it didn't come from the storm. Cole was sharpening his knife by the fire, a habit something to do with his hands. When Ellen looked up from her book and said without particular lead-up, "Edwin Pike came to see me, before the storm." Cole kept his eyes on the knife. What did he want? What Edwin Pike always wants. To be the man who saves someone, so he has something to hold over them afterward. She turned a page she hadn't actually read. "He offered me a room in his house, himself and his housekeeper as chaperones. Very proper. You said no." "Obviously." She set the book down. "He also told me you were dangerous, that I should be careful." Cole looked up then. "He told me about a man from Abilene," she continued, "who claimed you threatened him, over a card game supposedly." She held his gaze. "I want you to know, I looked at Edwin Pike's face when he told me that story, and I've been looking at faces my whole teaching life, and I know when a person is enjoying what they're telling you too much." He was enjoying it. Cole set the knife down slowly. "The man from Abilene was cheating at cards. I called him on it. He didn't like being called on it. We had words." A pause. "I didn't threaten him. I told him plainly what I'd seen and what I thought of him. He's apparently been improving the story since." "That's what I thought," Ellen said. "Not, that's what I hoped, or I believe you. Just, that's what I thought. Like it was already settled." Something in Cole's chest that had been held tight for a long time shifted just slightly. "Why are you telling me this?" he asked. "Because you should know what's being said, and because—" She stopped, started again more carefully. "Because I've had things said about me that weren't true, and people believed them anyway, and nobody thought to come tell me what the rumors were, so I could at least know what I was dealing with. It's a courtesy I wished someone had given me." Cole picked up the knife again, turned it in his hands. "Pike want anything else from you?" She was quiet for a beat too long. He looked up. "He made a suggestion," she said with a flatness so studied it told him it wasn't flat at all. "That if I were to cooperate with his business interests regarding the eastern pasture land adjacent to my property, he could make sure certain opinions about me in this town became considerably more favorable." Cole went very still. "He tried to buy your reputation." "He tried to buy my land access through my reputation. There's a distinction he's very proud of." That's the same thing. Yes, she said. It is. She picked her book back up. I told him what he could do with his suggestion. How'd he take it? Poorly. Something glinted briefly in her expression that might have been satisfaction. He told me I was making a mistake, that a woman in my position couldn't afford enemies. And I told him I'd been managing enemies my whole adult life, and I didn't see any reason to start worrying about it now. Cole looked at her. Really looked at her, not assessing, not guarded, just looking. You're not afraid of him, he said. I didn't say that. She turned a page. I said, I don't let it stop me. Those are different things. That night, the wind shifted direction. Cole heard it first, a change in the pitch, the storm finding a new angle, hitting the north wall now instead of the west. He sat up on his bunk listening. The logs groaned once deep and low. The stovepipe rattled. I hear it, Ellen said from across the cabin. She was already awake, or she'd never quite fallen asleep. Is it worse? Different, he said. Getting it from a new direction. Should be fine, the cabin's been here a long time, but I want to check the roof joists. He climbed up and pressed his palms against the rafters, one by one, feeling for flex, for movement, for anything wrong. It was dark enough that he was working by feel. He moved methodically the way his father had taught him to check things, not hoping for good news, just looking for the truth of it. Well, Ellen said from below. Sound, he said. Nothing moving that shouldn't be. He climbed back down and found her standing almost directly below him, tilting her head back to see what he was doing. They ended up closer than either of them had intended. She stepped back. He stepped sideways. Neither of them made a thing of it. Good, she said, and went back to her bunk. But Cole stood there another moment in the dark, one hand still on the rafter, aware that the distance between them in this cabin was not just physical, and not growing in the direction he'd expected. The third day, the firewood situation became a problem. The stack inside was down to half. What was left outside was under 3 feet of snow that was still falling. Cole had been making trips to the lean-to for wood, but the lean-to supply was lower than he'd thought, and he told Ellen straight. We need to ration the stove, he said. Let it burn lower than we'd like at night, build it up during the day when we need it for cooking. How cold are we talking? Uncomfortable, not dangerous. If we sleep with everything we have and don't waste heat arguing, we'll be fine. She considered this with the focused look he was coming to recognize as her actual thinking face, not stern, just concentrated, working a problem honestly. All right, she said. What else? That's it, just the wood. She nodded. Then that's what we do. Simple as that. No drama, no complaint, no performance of suffering. Just that's what we do. He found himself thinking that in 3 years of moving from town to town, he could count on one hand the people who'd handled hard news that cleanly. That night was colder. They both knew it. Neither of them mentioned it until Ellen somewhere around midnight said quietly in the dark, "This is where a person finds out what they actually need versus what they thought they needed." Cole lay still, staring at the ceiling. What do you mean? I thought I needed my routine. My house, my shelf of books and my own chair, and the shape of a life I'd built. I was furious when Hale told me I had to leave. She was quiet for a moment. And here I am, without any of it. And I'm all right. You're surprised by that? A little? A pause. You're not surprised when you're all right with less. I stopped expecting more a while back, Cole said. Makes it easier. That sounds lonely. He thought about it. It is, he said finally. I just got used to it. She didn't answer right away. And then very quietly, I got used to it too. I don't know if that means we're strong or just resigned. Maybe both, Cole said. The fire crackled low. The storm pressed on outside. And in the silence that followed, something between them shifted, not dramatically, not with any gesture or declaration, just a quiet mutual recognition that they were both people who had built walls so carefully and so long that they'd forgotten what it felt like to stand on the other side of one. The next morning, Cole went out to dig for wood and came back 40 minutes later, cold to the bone, having found the outside stack buried well under the snow, but largely intact. He was pulling off his snow-crusted coat when Ellen took one look at him and said, "Sit down," in a tone that invited no debate. She made him hold his hands over the stove, not touching, just near. She watched his color come back with the clinical attention of someone who knew what frostbite looked like and wasn't going to allow it. Her own hands were steady and practical, and did not linger, but for a moment they were close enough to his that he could feel the warmth of them. "You should have taken longer gloves," she said. "Didn't have longer gloves." "Mine are in my pack. Your hands are bigger, but they'd have done." He looked at her. "You'd have given me your gloves." "I'd have told you to take my gloves, which is slightly different," she said. "I don't like people nearly losing fingers when it's preventable." "I didn't nearly lose anything." "Not today." She stepped back. "Tomorrow, you take my gloves." He wanted to argue. He looked at her face and decided against it. "Thank you," he said instead. Something small and brief crossed her expression. Not quite a smile, but close enough that he recognized it as the territory where a smile lived. "There's salt pork left from yesterday," she said, moving to the stove. "I'll heat it." "Ellen," she turned. "I mean it. Thank you." She held his eyes for a moment longer than she needed to, and in that moment he saw something she hadn't been showing him. Something older and quieter, and more honest than the controlled exterior she kept up. Something that looked just briefly like the recognition of another person across a long stretch of loneliness. Then she turned back to the stove. "Don't thank me yet. Wait till you taste the salt pork." Edwin Pike's name came back into the cabin that afternoon uninvited through a conversation that hadn't started about him at all. They'd been talking, and they were talking more now, not carefully choosing words, but just talking the way people did when they'd run out of reasons to be guarded about the town, about Larkspur Gulch, about what held a place like that together and what pulled it apart. Ellen was talking about her students, some of them, and Cole was listening in the way he listened when something actually interested him, which was quietly and completely. "There's a boy," she said, "Tommy Brewster, 12 years old. He's the sharpest kid in that schoolroom by a long distance, and nobody sees it because he's quiet, and his clothes aren't clean, and his father drinks. So they look past him." Her voice was even, but the evenness cost her something. Cole could hear it. "I've been trying for 2 years to get the school board to approve a lending library so kids like Tommy could take books home. Pike's on the board." Cole's expression changed. "He blocked it. He tabled it 3 times. Says there's no budget. Meanwhile, he funded new signage for his own storefront from the town improvement account." She shook her head. "It's not even the money. The books would cost almost nothing. He just doesn't want a woman telling the board what to do." "Have you gone over his head?" "I've gone around under sideways. A beat. Last month I wrote to the county education office directly, without the board's knowledge." She paused. "Pike found out." Cole leaned forward. "Is that what the land conversation was really about?" She looked at him. "What do you mean?" "He came to you with the land offer after you went to the county. That's not coincidence. He's using your reputation as leverage to stop you from causing him problems, not the other way around." The moment stretched. He watched her work through it, really work through it, because it hadn't landed that way to her before he could see that. She'd understood the threat, but not the reason behind it. "He's worried about the county review," she said slowly. "He's worried about what they'll find when they look at the board's accounts." Her eyes sharpened, and for the first time in 2 days, what was in them wasn't careful or controlled or held back. It was fury, clean and cold, and directed with surgical precision. "That man," she said quietly, "has been using this town like a personal account since before I got here." "Probably," Cole said, "and you're the one person who's been poking at the edges of it." She was quiet for a moment. Then, "I need to get back to town." Storm still up. "I know." She looked at the shuttered window. "I know." She sat back, let out a breath. "When it breaks." "When it breaks," Cole agreed. She looked at him across the small table, and there was something in the look that was new, something that recognized him not as a stranger. She was managing not as a problem. She'd been handed by a sheriff and a snowstorm, but as a person on the same side of something. "Thank you," she said. "For what?" "For thinking about it differently than I did." A pause. "I don't usually have anyone to think out loud with." Cole looked at the fire, thought about 3 years of keeping everything he thought entirely to himself because there was nobody to tell it to who wasn't already halfway to deciding something bad about him. "Neither do I," he said. The storm pressed against the walls, the fire burned on, and outside, somewhere beyond the snow and the wind and the mountain silence, Edwin Pike was in Larkspur Gulch, not knowing that the two people he'd dismissed most thoroughly, the old maid and the suspected outlaw, were sitting in a cabin together, getting considerably more dangerous. The storm broke its worst fury on the 4th day, not by stopping, but by pausing the way a fighter steps back, not to quit, but to breathe. The wind dropped from a roar to something almost manageable. The snow still fell, but vertically now, instead of sideways, which felt like a mercy after days of it driving against every surface, like it had a grievance. Cole noticed Ellen noticing the change. She'd been sitting with her book open, but unread for the better part of an hour, and when the wind shifted, she went still in the way that meant she was listening to something more than the words on the page. "It's not over," Cole said without looking up from the harness strap he was mending. "I know," she said, "but it's thinking about it." He glanced at her then. She was looking at the shuttered window with an expression that wasn't quite hope and wasn't quite resignation. Somewhere between the two in the complicated territory where people lived when they'd been through enough to know that things changed just rarely on schedule. "The accounts," she said, still looking at the window. "If Pike has been drawing from the town improvement fund, there'll be a record. The county auditor would find it inside a week. That's assuming the county auditor actually looks. I gave them reason to." She finally turned from the window. "My letter to the education office outlined the library request specifically with dates and minutes from each board meeting. Every time Pike tabled it. Every budget line he cited. If they look at those numbers against the actual expenditures, the signage cost alone is going to raise a question." Cole set the harness strap down. "You built a case. I built what I had." A pause. "I was a school teacher, not a lawyer. But I know how to document things and I know what questions to ask." He looked at her for a moment. "Did you know what you were doing when you sent that letter, that it would land the way it's landing?" She was quiet for a beat too long. Then honestly, "I knew it would make him angry. I didn't know how angry." She met his eyes. "I thought he'd try to block my contract renewal. I didn't think he'd come after my property access and my reputation in the same week." "He's scared," Cole said. "I know that now." She looked at her hands. "It's a strange thing knowing that a man like Edwin Pike is afraid of what you might do. I spent 4 years being afraid of what he might do to my standing in this town, and it turns out we've been frightened of each other the whole time." "The difference is, you had actual cause," Cole said. "He's fighting a woman with a letter and a lending library. That's not a threat, that's a conscience with paperwork." Something crossed Ellen's face that he hadn't seen before. It lasted only a second, a softening, a kind of surprised warmth, like light, finding a window it hadn't expected. Then it was gone, and she was practical again. "You're better at this than I expected," she said. "At what?" "Seeing things clearly." She picked her book up, not to read it, just to have something in her hands. "Most people see what they expect to see. You look at the actual shape of things." "Had to," Cole said simply. "When the story everyone tells about you isn't true, you start paying attention to whether stories in general are true." She looked at him steadily. 3 years of that would make a person either very wise or very bitter. "Some of both," he admitted. She almost smiled. "Yes, I imagine so." He found out about James Reed by accident. He wasn't prying, wasn't even particularly curious, or told himself that. But he'd been looking through the cabin's small store of supplies and found a worn almanac on the shelf, and tucked inside its front cover was a folded letter, old enough that the fold lines had gone soft, and the ink had faded at the edges. He'd pushed it back without reading it because it wasn't his, but the motion of his hand must have made a sound, because Ellen looked up sharply from across the cabin. She saw what he was holding. He saw her see it. "Sorry," he said immediately, handing the almanac to her. "Wasn't looking for anything personal." She took it, looked at the letter inside without opening it, just held it for a moment with a stillness that told him it mattered. "It's not mine," she said, which surprised him. "It must belong to whoever left the almanac here. A ranger, probably." She turned the almanac over in her hands. "I read it when I first came in, out of habit. I'm a reader. I read anything that's in front of me." She set it back on the shelf. It was a letter from a man to his wife, written when he was away on duty. He was telling her he'd be home by October. Was he? The letter was still here, she said. "So I don't know." The simplicity of that sat heavy between them. Cole didn't try to make it lighter. "James wrote me letters," Ellen said, not looking at him, looking at the shelf. "When he was sick and couldn't get up and I was in the other room, he'd write me notes and slide them under the door." A pause. "Isn't that strange?" His wife was 12 feet away and he wrote her notes. Why? He said things came out cleaner in writing, that his voice didn't sound right to him anymore, and he didn't want the last things he said to me to be spoken through a cough. She stopped, started again quieter. The last note said, "Don't be lonely on my account. I lived well. So should you." She turned from the shelf and looked at Cole directly. "I kept it for 3 years, then last spring I burned it." Cole didn't ask why. He waited. "Because I realized I'd been using it as an excuse," she said. "Every time someone suggested I was being too guarded, too closed off, I'd think about that note and tell myself I was honoring what he asked for, living well, being independent." She sat down at the table. "But James didn't mean live alone forever. He meant don't let grief eat you. And I'd been confusing the two things for 3 years. The fire popped. The wind found a gap in something and whistled for a moment before the cabin absorbed it." "When did you figure that out?" Cole said. "About a week before the storm," she said. "Which is unfortunate timing." He didn't push it further, but he held the weight of what she'd said and didn't put it down. The wolves came that night. Cole heard them first, that particular sound lower and more sustained than wind. That meant something living and hungry was close to the cabin. He was on his feet before he was fully awake, hand reaching for his rifle in the dark. "I hear them," Ellen said from across the cabin. She was already up, already had her rifle. He'd forgotten or hadn't let himself fully register that she'd said she could shoot. Now he heard her moving with the assurance of someone who wasn't operating on fear, but on training. "How many?" she said low. 3, maybe 4. Hard to tell through the walls. "Bess." "Yeah." He was already moving to the back of the cabin to the lean-to door. The horse had gone quiet, too quiet, which was its own kind of alarm. He eased the lean-to door open and went through into the dark. Bess was pressed to the far wall trembling, but she hadn't made a sound. Smart animal. He put a hand on her neck and felt her shaking under his palm. "Easy," he murmured. "Easy, girl. I've got you." He could hear them just outside, not scratching yet, not at the door, but circling. He could hear the snow moving under their paws in the silences between gusts. Ellen was behind him now. He hadn't heard her cross the cabin floor, but she was there, rifle up. "There," she said barely above a whisper. He looked where she was looking. A gap in the lean-to siding maybe 2 inches wide, just enough to see through. 2 eyes catching the ambient light. Close. Much closer than the sound had suggested. "Don't fire yet," he said quietly. "They haven't committed." If they commit to that door, there won't be time. She was right. He knew she was right. He reached past her and braced the lean-to door with his boot, putting his weight against it. When they test the door, he said, fire through the siding, not to hit, just to scare. If they scatter, they scatter. If they don't. I know, she said. Calm. Completely remarkably calm. The door shook once, a single testing impact, not a wolf throwing itself against it, but something deliberate and evaluating. Bess threw her head. Cole held the door. Ellen fired. The sound in the confined space was enormous, a flat crack that compressed the air and rang in his ears. And then outside was a startled retreating sound. Paws, scrambling bodies moving fast through snow, and then silence. Bess shook hard once, then stilled. Cole held the door another 30 seconds, then another. Then he slowly let his weight off it. Gone, Ellen said. Gone. He turned. In the dark of the lean-to, she was a shape with a rifle smoke still faint from the barrel, expression invisible. Good shot, he said. Or good judgment, anyway. I aimed high, she said. Didn't want to kill one unless I had to. Why not? Because frightened animals are just hungry, she said. That's not a killing offense. He looked at her for a long moment in the dark. She lowered the rifle and checked it in the practiced way of someone who'd done it many times, and Cole felt something he hadn't felt in a very long time. Not attraction exactly, or not just attraction, but the rarer thing underneath it. The recognition of someone who handled the world in a way you actually respected. Come on, she said, and led the way back into the cabin. They sat up for another hour after, not because they expected the wolves back, but because the adrenaline had to go somewhere. Cole made coffee without asking if she wanted it. She took the cup without comment. You weren't scared, he said. I was scared. She looked at the fire. Being scared and being functional are two separate things. I learned that when James was sick. You can feel the fear completely and still do what needs doing. Most people can't separate those. Most people haven't had 4 years of practice doing everything alone. She held the cup in both hands. The first winter after James died, the stovepipe came loose in a February storm. Middle of the night, no heat ice forming inside the windows. I was so terrified I could barely stand up. She paused. So I stood up anyway, fixed the pipe, got the fire going, and somewhere in the middle of doing it, I realized that the fear was still there, it just wasn't in charge anymore. Cole was quiet for a moment. You gave yourself that. I didn't have anyone else to give it to me. She said it without self-pity. Just fact. What about you? What did you teach yourself? He thought about it. Not to want things too much, he said. If you don't need a place, it doesn't hurt when they run you out of it. If you don't count on people, you can't be let down. She looked at him. And has that worked? Mostly. Mostly, she repeated. That word is doing a lot of work in that sentence. He looked at her. She was watching him with the direct, honest attention he'd stopped expecting from anyone. The kind of attention that wasn't trying to catch him out, just genuinely interested in what was true. There's a house, he said before he quite decided to say it. Outside of Calverton, about 40 miles east of here. Small place, river frontage, good land. I used to ride past it sometimes. He stopped. I'd tell myself I wasn't thinking about it, whether it was for sale, whether a man who kept his head down and worked hard could have something like that. But you were thinking about it. Every time I rode past it. Why didn't you look into it? Because the next week I'd be run out of Calverton on the back of the Silver Creek Rumor, and it didn't seem like the right time to put down roots. He looked at the fire. And the time after that. And the time after that. Ellen was quiet. He could feel her thinking, not performing thought, actually working through something. The house might still be there, she said carefully. Might be. 3 years isn't forever. No, he said. It isn't. She looked into the fire, and he looked at her, looking into it, and neither of them said what was in the space between those words. But it was there, and they both knew it, and neither of them was quite ready to name it yet, which was all right. Some things needed more than 4 days of snowstorm to earn their name. The fifth morning changed everything. Cole was outside checking the woodpile when he saw tracks in the snow that hadn't been there at last light. Not wolf tracks. Boot tracks. Heavy, deliberate, coming up the north trail and stopping about 20 yards from the cabin and then turning back. Someone had been here in the night. He stood very still and looked at the tracks for a long moment, reading them the way a man reads tracks when he's learned to pay attention to such things. 2 sets. Both large. Both heading back down the trail, which meant they'd come up, reconnoitered, and left. Not lost travelers. Not someone looking for shelter. Someone looking at the cabin. He went back inside without running. Ran was the wrong call until he knew what he was dealing with. Ellen looked up when he came in and read his face in about half a second. "What?" she said. "Tracks outside. 2 men came up in the night and looked at the cabin and went back down." She was on her feet. "Pike? Too soon to know. Could be the sheriff checking on us." He said it because it was true, even though his gut was saying something else. "Could be a lot of things. Could be Pike's men," she said, not asking, saying. "Could be." She crossed to her rifle and picked it up and checked the load, and the motion was so natural and so complete that for a moment it simply took his breath away, not dramatically, just in the way of things that were exactly what they needed to be in the exact moment they needed to be it. "Tell me what you need me to do," she said. "Not, are we safe? Not, I'm frightened. Not, what does this mean for us? Tell me what you need me to do." Cole picked up his own rifle and thought of the house outside Calverton with the river frontage and the good land, and thought about what it would mean to have someone beside you who asked that question instead of the other ones. "Stay back from the window," he said. "Keep the stove going. I want smoke from the chimney so they think everything's normal up here. And if anything comes through that door that isn't me, you shoot first and ask after." She nodded. "And you, I'm going to go down the trail a ways and see what they left behind." Cole. He was already at the door. She said his name, and he stopped the first time she'd used it directly. Just his name by itself, without any buffer around it, and the directness of it landed somewhere in him like a stone landing in still water. "Be careful," she said. He looked at her over his shoulder. "Always am." "No," she said quietly. "Be careful because there are now 2 of us, and that changes the math." He held her eyes for a moment. Then he went out into the cold. He followed the tracks down the trail 70 yards before he found what he was looking for. And what he found made his stomach drop, and his jaw set hard, and his hands grip the rifle with a new and specific kind of purpose. Tied to a tree tucked under a low branch where the snow hadn't quite reached it was a folded piece of paper. He took it back to the cabin, opened it on the table. Ellen read it beside him without being asked, which was how things were between them now, no more careful division of what was his and what was hers. They were in this together. They'd apparently been in this together for a while. The note said, "Heart. Leave the woman and ride out tonight. You do, and there's no trouble. You don't, and we settle the Silver Creek question here. You won't like how we settle it." The handwriting was rough, uneducated, the work of a man who didn't write much. But the message was clear enough. Ellen straightened up slowly from the note. Her voice when she spoke was very quiet and very level. "They're using me to move you." "Yes. And if you leave, then you're here alone," he said. "Which I'm not doing." She looked at him. He looked at her. The fire crackled. Outside, the storm was rebuilding itself, the wind climbing back toward its earlier pitch, the snow thickening again. "You understand what this means," she said. "Means we've got company coming whether I ride out or not. This note isn't a real offer. It's to see if I'll panic." "Will they come in the storm?" "They came up in the night already. They're committed." He folded the note and put it in his coat pocket. "We need to get ready." "Ready," she said. Then, Cole. Whatever Pike has told those men, whatever version of the Silver Creek story they believe, it won't hold up. Not now. I can testify to what he's done with the board funds. I can... Ellen. He stopped her gently. "One thing at a time. She closed her mouth, nodded once. Then she went to the window, eased the shutter open just a crack, and looked out at the white and the dark, and the approaching dark of men who'd decided a rumor was enough reason to hurt someone. "All right," she said. "Tell me what we're doing." Cole checked his rifle, checked his ammunition, and began. Cole didn't waste words explaining things Ellen already understood. He told her where to position herself left of the door out of the direct line if it came in fast close enough to the stove that the heat wouldn't make her hands stiff. He told her to save her first shot, that the first shot was always the most important, because it set the tempo of everything that came after, and a missed first shot in a closed space told the other side more than you wanted them to know. She listened without interrupting. When he was done, she said, "What about Bess?" He hadn't expected that. He looked at her. "If they want to disable us," she said, "the horse is the first target. Without Bess, we can't leave even when the storm breaks." He'd already thought of it, but the fact that she had immediately, practically without being prompted, told him something he filed away for later. "I moved her to the far corner of the lean-to before I came in. The wall there is doubled logs, went up twice where they reinforced the original structure. She's as protected as I can make her." Ellen nodded. "All right. There's something else." He pulled the note from his coat pocket and smoothed it on the table again. She'd already read it, but he pointed to the line about the Silver Creek question. "They're not here to collect evidence. They're here to make a problem disappear, and I'm the problem. Then we make sure they don't get the chance." "If it goes bad," he started. "It won't. Ellen, if it goes bad, I need you to get to the lean-to and get Bess and ride straight south, no matter what you hear behind you. Don't stop. Don't look back. Get to Hale." She looked at him with an expression that was equal parts irritation and something softer underneath it. "And what would you have me tell the sheriff when I get there? That I left you? That you survived? That's what I'd have you tell him." "I'm not leaving you in this cabin alone," she said with a flatness that ended the discussion as cleanly as a door closing. Cole looked at her for one long moment. Then he said, "All right," and let it go because some arguments weren't worth having, and some people weren't built for retreat, and he'd known that about her since the first morning she'd made coffee like it was a statement of intent. They took their positions, and they waited. The waiting was the worst part. It always was. An hour passed, maybe more. The storm had climbed back to its earlier fury, which was both good and bad. Good, because visibility outside was near zero, and any man coming up that trail was fighting the weather as much as anything else. Bad, because the same conditions that slowed them hid them. Cole stood to the right of the door, back against the log wall, listening past the wind for anything underneath it. Ellen was to his left, rifle up, her breathing slow and measured. He could hear it, that steady rhythm, and it steadied him in a way he hadn't expected. "They'll wait for the wind to cover their approach," he said low. "Then it works for us too," she said. "They can't hear us either." He glanced at her. In the firelight, she looked like someone who had made a decision and finished making it. No more internal debate, just presence. Just readiness. He'd seen that look on men in hard situations. He hadn't expected to see it on a schoolteacher in a mountain cabin, and he understood now that his failure to expect it said more about his assumptions than it did about her. Then the first shot came through the wall, not the door. The wall. The west-facing wall, the one Cole hadn't positioned for, which told him immediately that there were more than two men and they'd split up, and at least one of them knew what he was doing. The round punched through the logs and hit the far wall low, and the sound of it inside the cabin was enormous. A flat crack followed by the thud of impact, and then the thin whistle of air through the hole. Ellen didn't cry out. She dropped to a crouch and moved without Cole having to say anything, repositioning closer to the floor, away from the new angle. "West wall," Cole said, which she already knew. "And the door," she said, because she'd heard what he'd heard, a creak on the front step that wasn't the wind. Cole put 2 rounds through the door, low and wide, not aimed to kill, but aimed to communicate that the inside of the cabin was not undefended. The creak stopped. He heard scrambling, a man pulling back fast from a step he'd committed to. You got him thinking, Ellen said. For about 30 seconds. The next shot came through the west wall again, higher this time and closer. These weren't warning shots. Whoever was on the west side was sighting in, adjusting. Cole moved to the east wall and put his eye to a gap in the logs and saw nothing but white and dark and the shapes of trees doing nothing useful. I can't see the west shooter, he said. I can hear him. Ellen was absolutely still, head slightly tilted, and Cole realized she was tracking by sound through the storm and the walls, and that this was not guesswork, but actual skill. He moves after he fires, shifts left. He's going to work his way to the corner. If he gets to the corner, he has an angle on the door from both sides. I know. She looked at Cole. Can you hold the door? You're not. Can you hold the door? She said again with no variation in her tone, but a weight in it that stopped him. Yes, he said. Then I'll handle the west wall. She moved before he could respond, not recklessly, but with the decisive efficiency of someone who had thought 3 steps ahead and was now executing the third one. She crossed to the west wall, found a gap between the logs at a height that kept her below the angle of incoming fire, and put the barrel of her rifle through it. Cole swung back to the door. 3 seconds passed. Then Ellen fired once controlled, and from outside came a shout that was not a death sound, but was unmistakably a pain sound. A man reacting to something close and sudden, and then the sound of movement retreating fast. Shoulder maybe, Ellen said, pulling the rifle back from the gap. He was behind that big pine moving left, just like I said. I didn't have a clean shot, but I had close enough. He'll stay down. Long enough. She reloaded with practiced hands. Your door. Cole's door came alive in the next moment, a heavy impact, a boot, or a shoulder. Someone testing the latch rather than waiting. He braced himself against the inner wall and said loudly enough to carry through the logs. Next man who touches that door gets buried up here. Silence. Wind. The hiss of snow through the hole in the west wall. Then a voice from outside, not the door from the side, coming from a man who'd positioned himself against the north wall, where he could speak without being exposed. The voice was rough and unhurried, and carried the particular confidence of a man holding more cards than he thought he needed. Heart. A pause. We don't want the woman. We've got no quarrel with her. You come out and walk down the trail with us, and she goes home safe. That's the whole deal. Cole said nothing. You think about what you're doing, the voice said. You're making her part of this when she doesn't have to be. That's on you. Cole felt Ellen's eyes on him from across the cabin. He didn't look at her. He kept his eyes on the door and the voice outside, and the situation, which was this 3 or 4 men, at least one injured, all of them committed enough to come up a mountain in a blizzard, which meant they'd been promised something significant for the job. Who hired you? Cole called out. A pause. Don't know what you mean. Yes, you do. Who's paying for this trip up a mountain in December? Because nobody does this for fun. Another pause longer. Pike, the voice said, which surprised Cole, surprised him that the man admitted it, which meant either he was stupid, or he was confident that Cole wasn't going to live to repeat it. Edwin Pike, Cole said, town council member, sent you up here to deal with a man and a school teacher. Just you, the voice said. The woman's not the issue. She knows what he's done with the town accounts, Cole said, raising his voice enough to carry clearly. That's why she's an issue whether you know it or not. He sent you up here knowing that, silence. You're working for a man who's been stealing from the town improvement fund, Cole continued. And when the county comes to audit those books, every man associated with Edwin Pike is going to want to be somewhere else. You want to add murder to that? The silence lasted longer this time. Ellen crossed to Cole's side, moving low and quick, and said in his ear, There's someone moving on the south side, light, careful, different from the others. He processed that. How many do you make total? 4. Maybe 5. Too many. Too many for 2 people with limited ammunition and no backup. He knew it and she knew it, and neither of them said it because saying it didn't help, and they were past the point where honesty about the odds served any purpose except fear. "We need time," he said quietly. "We need Hale." She said equally quiet. "Hale doesn't know." And then, from somewhere down the mountain trail, a voice he didn't recognize, sharp, carrying the voice of a man accustomed to being obeyed in difficult conditions. "Larkspur Gulch, Sheriff's Office. Every man put his weapon down now." The next 30 seconds were the most chaotic Cole had experienced in 3 years of difficult situations. Outside the cabin, the arrangement of bodies and intentions that had been building for the last hour came apart all at once. He heard shouting 2-3 voices overlapping, and then a shot from somewhere down the trail, and then return fire, and then the particular scrambling sound of men deciding that the calculation had shifted against them. Cole moved to the door. "Stay down," he said to Ellen, not because he thought she'd argue, but because he needed her to hear it. He opened the door. The cold came in like a wall. The snow was still falling heavy and thick, but through it he could make out shapes. Men moving, 2 of them, running hard to the east, away from the trail. One man down in the snow, not moving, another on his knees with his hands up. And coming up the trail, 6 men with Sheriff Douglas Hale in front, rifles up, moving with the grim efficiency of men who had already decided how this was ending. Hale saw Cole in the doorway and held up a hand, half stop, half reassurance. Cole lowered his rifle. Behind him, Ellen came to the door. She stood beside Cole and looked out at the aftermath, and she didn't make a sound, but he felt the breath go out of her. Not fear releasing, but something larger. The long tension of the last hours finally finding a way out. Hale came up to the cabin, his coat white with snow, his face set. He looked at Cole. He looked at Ellen. He looked at the hole in the west wall and the spent casings on the floor visible through the open door. "You two all right?" he said. "Yes," Ellen said steadily. "Bess is fine," Cole added, because he knew Hale would think to ask about the horse, and he wanted to get there first. Hale looked at him for a moment with an expression that might have been something between relief and exasperation. "You want to tell me what happened?" "After," Cole said. "Who's the man down?" "One of Ned Pike's hired hands. Name of Cassidy. He'll live, took a round in the shoulder." Hale glanced at Ellen with a look that contained a question. "West Wall," she said without inflection. Hale's expression shifted by the smallest degree. "I see." He turned back to his men who were securing the man on his knees, and he called out a series of orders that organized the scene with the efficiency of a man who'd done it before. Cole stepped back inside to let the cold out. Ellen came with him. They stood on opposite sides of the cabin and looked at each other across the small space that had been their whole world for 5 days, and neither of them had the right words immediately, so neither of them reached for them. After a moment, Ellen said, "How did Hale know to come, Amos?" Cole said, which was a guess but felt like the right one. "He knew we'd gone up here. He knew about the tracks I saw, and he knows this town well enough to know that when 2 of Pike's men ride out in a blizzard, it's not a social call." He couldn't have known for sure. "No." He made a judgment call. Cole looked at his rifle in his hands. "Good man, Amos." "Yes," she said. "He is." Hale came back inside, alone, shaking snow from his shoulders. He looked around the cabin with the careful inventory of a man cataloging the evidence of what had happened here. Then he sat down at the table unbidden and folded his hands and looked at Cole. "I'm going to need your version of events," he said, starting from the note. Cole pulled the note from his pocket and laid it on the table. Hale read it. His face didn't change much, but something behind his eyes went very still in the way it did when a man in his position found out that someone he'd tolerated had crossed a line that couldn't be uncrossed. "Pike," he said. "He admitted it," Cole said. "The man outside. I asked directly, and he told me." Hale looked up. "He told you?" "He didn't think I'd be alive to repeat it." Hale turned the note over in his hands. Then he set it down and looked at Ellen. "The county letter," he said. "You wrote to the education office about the library funding." 6 weeks ago, Ellen said. "Pike's been on edge since then. I noticed it, but I didn't..." He stopped. I should have connected it sooner. He said it without excuse, just accounting for it flatly. The county auditor arrives in 3 weeks. Pike knows what they're going to find. What are they going to find? Cole said. Hale was quiet for a moment. About $4,000 diverted from the town improvement account over 3 years. Road repairs that didn't happen. A school supply order that was processed twice and delivered once. He looked at Ellen. And a lumber invoice for materials used on Pike's private ranch billed to the town. Ellen sat down, not dramatically. She simply sat down at the table across from Hale, as if her legs had been informed that the crisis was over and had taken the opportunity to remind her how long she'd been standing. He was always going to come after me, she said, not asking, understanding finally the full shape of it. Once you wrote that letter, yes, Hale said. You pulled the thread he was most afraid of. He looked at her steadily. You did the right thing, Ellen. I want you to know that. I know it didn't feel like it just now, but you did. She was quiet. Then, Tommy Brewster still doesn't have books to take home. Hale blinked. Then, slowly, something moved across his face that was almost a smile. No, he said. But I imagine the library budget's about to open up considerably. It was late by the time Hale's men cleared the scene, and the injured men were stabilized for the trip down. 2 of Pike's hired hands had run and would be tracked later. One was in custody. Cassidy, the one with the shoulder wound, was being taken down on a makeshift litter. Before Hale left with his men, he pulled Cole aside just inside the cabin door out of earshot of the others. You're going to want to know, Hale said low, that I've had a correspondence from the sheriff in Teller County about the Silver Creek robbery. Cole went still. They made an arrest 4 months ago, Hale said. Man named DeVore. He confessed. The whole crew is named. He met Cole's eyes. Your name is not among them. The silence that followed was the kind that had weight, that had texture. Cole stood in it and let it settle into him, and it took a moment because 3 years of something doesn't lift all at once. It comes off in layers like ice in a thaw. You can feel it going, but the cold is still there for a while after. 4 months ago, Cole said. The paperwork doesn't travel fast, Hale said. And there was no reason for Teller County to post a general notice about a man who was never officially charged. He looked at Cole with something that might have been an apology. I looked into it when you came to town. I don't move on rumors alone. I didn't know that, Cole said. No, Hale said. People rarely do. He put his hat back on and turned up his collar. Storm should break by morning. You 2 can come down when you're ready. He paused at the door. Don't rush. Cole looked at him. Hale's expression was scrupulously neutral. I mean, because the trail will be icy, he said, and went out. Cole stood alone by the door for a long moment. Then he turned around. Ellen was at the stove building. The fire back up, it had burned low during the standoff, and the cabin had gotten cold, and she was doing the practical necessary thing, which was what she always did. He watched her stack the wood with sure hands, coax the embers back to life with breath and patience, and he thought about 3 years of riding toward something he couldn't name and never finding it in any of the towns he passed through. And he thought about a house outside Calverton with river frontage and good land. And he thought about what made a place a home, and whether it was the land or the walls or something else entirely. Hale looked into the Silver Creek case, he said. There was an arrest, 4 months ago, full confession. My name isn't in it. Ellen's hands stopped moving. She turned from the stove and looked at him. In the returning firelight, her expression did something complicated: relief and anger and grief, all at once, the particular combination of emotions that comes when something unjust is finally resolved, but the years it took are still sitting there, unreturnably spent. 4 months ago, she said. Yes. She looked at him for a long moment. Then she said very quietly, You've been carrying that for 3 years, and it was over 4 months ago, and you didn't know. No, he said. She turned back to the fire. She was quiet, and he let her be quiet because he understood that she was angry on his behalf, and he was learning that when Ellen Reed felt something, she needed a moment to take the full measure of it before she spoke. "What do you do now?" she said to the fire. "Haven't decided," he said. Then more honestly, "I keep thinking about that house." She turned around again. This time she looked at him differently, not measuring, not analyzing. Just looking at him the way she looked at things she'd already made up her mind about. "Calverton is 40 miles east," she said. "Yes? That's not far." "No," he said. "It isn't." The fire came up strong between them, the new wood catching. The cabin filled with warmth again, and the storm outside had dropped to something almost gentle, as if it too had spent its anger and was deciding what came next. Neither Cole nor Ellen moved for a long moment. Neither of them looked away, and in the space between where they stood across the small table, and the warm air, and the 5 days of weather, and wolves, and gunfire, and coffee, and honesty, something settled, not announced, not performed, just quietly and permanently true. He didn't say it. She didn't say it. There would be time for saying. For now, it was enough that it was there, solid and real. The way real things always are. Not arrived at quickly, not handed over freely, but earned through the only currency that actually meant anything. Who you were when it got hard. And they both knew now exactly who the other one was. The storm broke before dawn. Cole heard it go, not loudly, not with any ceremony, just the slow withdrawal of wind from the walls, the sound of something that had been pressing hard against everything finally easing back. He lay still on his bunk and listened to the silence fill in where the roaring had been, and it felt enormous. 5 days of that sound, and now nothing. Just the soft settle of snow, and the crack of the cooling stove, and the quiet breathing of the cabin around him. He was awake before Ellen. He built the fire up and put the coffee on, and stood by the shuttered window thinking about the house in Calverton, thinking about Hale's words, thinking about 4 months ago, when his name was cleared from a crime he'd never committed, and the world had simply continued not knowing it, carrying the old story forward out of habit because nobody had told it to stop. He heard Ellen wake, the particular shift of her breathing, the small sound of someone returning from sleep to consciousness, finding themselves in an unfamiliar place and remembering in sequence where they were and what had happened. "It stopped," she said. "Before first light," he said. "We can go down when you're ready." She was quiet for a moment. He didn't turn from the window. "Cole." Her voice was careful, feeling for something. "What happens when we go back down?" He turned then. She was sitting up on her bunk, her hair loose from the braid she'd kept it in, and she looked like someone who had decided overnight to ask the direct question rather than carry it down the mountain unasked. "Pike gets arrested," he said. "You give your testimony to Hale about the land offer and the board meetings. The county auditor comes and does what auditors do. Tommy Brewster gets his books." "That's not what I meant," she said. He looked at her. "I know." So, he crossed to the table and sat down, and he put both hands flat on the wood and looked at them for a moment. "I've been thinking about the house outside Calverton," he said. "River frontage. Good land. It was for sale last I knew 3 years ago." He paused. "Might still be." "Might be," she said. A careful echo. "I was thinking I'd ride out and look at it, once the trail clears." "Calverton is 40 miles east," she said again, the same words she'd used last night, but asking something different now. 40 miles, he agreed. "Not far." "Not far at all," she said. "For a man who's ridden 3 years of roads." He looked up at her. She was watching him with those direct dark eyes that didn't permit evasion and never had. And he thought about every careful guarded thing he'd been about to say and decided against all of it. "I'd like it better," he said, "if it wasn't just me riding out to look at it." The silence that followed was not uncomfortable. It was the silence of something settling, of a question, asked plainly, finally getting the space it deserved. Ellen got up from the bunk. She moved to the stove and poured herself the coffee he'd made, and she held the cup in both hands the way she always did, and she looked at the fire for a moment before she turned to him. "I have a teaching contract," she said, "through May." May isn't far. I have students. She looked at him. I have Tommy Brewster, who is 12 years old and has never once had a book of his own, and I am not leaving until that changes. I wouldn't ask you to. Good. She held his gaze. And I have testimony to give, and a library to establish, and there's the matter of the county auditor, and I intend to be present for every part of what happens to Edwin Pike, because I did not spend 4 years being afraid of that man to miss watching it come apart. Sounds like you've got until May, he said. Sounds like I do. She took a sip of coffee. Then quietly, what will you do until May? He thought about it. Hale mentioned the town could use a deputy, temporarily, until things settle. Something moved in Ellen's expression, a warmth she didn't quite suppress in time. Sheriff Hale said that. He implied it strongly. He's a perceptive man. He really is, Cole said. She set her cup down on the table and looked at him across it, and what was between them now was not the careful distance of the first night, not the measured politeness of the second day, not even the deeper honesty of the days that followed. It was something else. Something that had no careful name yet, but was solid enough to stand on. After May, she said. The house in Calverton. If it's still for sale. And if it isn't. He held her eyes. Then we find another one. She picked up her cup again, took another sip, and nodded once, not tentatively, not provisionally, but with the clean finality of a woman who made decisions when she made them and didn't revisit them afterward. All right, she said. Then let's go home. The trail down was hard. Ice under the new snow, the path cut to half its width by drifts, the air sharp enough to make each breath a small effort. Bess picked her way carefully, Cole walking beside her, Ellen just ahead of them, both moving with the sure-footed practicality that he'd stopped being surprised by and started simply counting on. They didn't talk much on the way down. They didn't need to. The kind of conversation they'd been having for 5 days doesn't require constant maintenance once it's established. It just runs underneath everything like a current. Halfway down the trail, Ellen stopped. Cole came up beside her, looked where she was looking. Below them, at the place where the mountain trail met the edge of town, there were people. Not a crowd exactly, but more than a few figures standing in the cold waiting. He could make out Hale and Amos from the livery, and 2 or 3 others he recognized by coat and build, if not by face. They came out, Ellen said. Word travels fast, Cole said. He paused. How do you feel about that? She looked at him sideways. Ask me again in 10 minutes. She started walking down again.
想说.
Hale met them at the edge of town. He looked at both of them with the careful assessment of a man who had sent people into a dangerous situation and was accounting for what came back. Trail wasn't too bad, he said. Manageable, Ellen said. Good. He looked at Cole. Pike was arrested this morning. His own man Cassidy gave a full statement from the doctor's table before they finished stitching his shoulder. Names, dates, instructions. Everything. A pause. Apparently, Pike told him the job was just to scare you off. Cassidy wasn't pleased to discover what scare off looked like in practice. Pike's in custody, Cole said, until the circuit judge arrives, which given the road conditions will be approximately 3 weeks. Hale's expression was dry. He's been making the argument that he's a respected member of the community and should be held at his own home. And, Ellen said, and I told him the jail was very comfortable and he was welcome to test that assessment. Hale let a beat pass. He's in the jail. Ellen made a sound that was not quite a laugh but was in the same territory. Amos pushed forward from the small group, moving with the slightly guilty energy of a man who has done something he thought was right but wasn't sure how it would be received. He stopped in front of Cole and pulled his hat from his head. I sent word to Hale, he said. Day before yesterday, when I saw Pike's men ride out in the storm. He looked at Cole steadily. I know you didn't ask me to, but something wasn't sitting right, and I decided I'd rather be wrong and embarrassed than right and too late. Cole put out his hand. Amos took it and shook it, and the relief that crossed the old man's face was the specific relief of someone who'd taken a risk that came out right. "Thank you, Amos," Cole said, and meant it in a way that the two words couldn't quite hold, but Amos seemed to receive it anyway. Mrs. Thornton was waiting on the main street. Cole saw Ellen see her and watched Ellen's jaw set slightly, that controlled expression coming back like armor being buckled on. He stayed a half step behind her, not to shield her, just to be there. Agnes Thornton stood very straight in the cold, her coat buttoned to the throat, her expression working through something complicated. She looked at Ellen, and then at Cole, and then at Ellen again, and whatever she'd prepared to say appeared to have rearranged itself between her house and this spot on the street. "Ellen," she said. "Agnes," Ellen said. Equally neutral, waiting. Mrs. Thornton pressed her lips together. Then she said in a voice that was clearly costing her something, "I heard what happened, what you did, what you both did." She paused. "I owe you an apology for the things I said before the storm." Ellen was quiet for a moment. Cole watched her decide. "You were worried about me," Ellen said finally. "I know that." "I was worried about your reputation," Mrs. Thornton said with an honesty that seemed to surprise even her, "which isn't the same thing, and I should have known the difference." She glanced at Cole briefly and then back to Ellen. "Is he—" She stopped, started again. "Will he be staying in Larkspur Gulch?" "Temporarily," Cole said before Ellen could answer. "I've been asked to help the sheriff while things settle." Mrs. Thornton looked at him for a long moment. He met her gaze without challenge, just steadily, the way he'd learned to meet the particular scrutiny of people who were revising an opinion and needed a moment to do it. "Well," she said at last, "the town could use the help." She looked back at Ellen. "I'll bring supper round tonight. To your house. Give you something warm while you get the stove going again." Ellen looked at her. "Thank you, Agnes. That's kind." Mrs. Thornton nodded once and moved away with the brisk efficiency of a woman who had managed an uncomfortable moment and was now moving on to the next necessary thing. Cole watched her go. "That," Ellen said quietly beside him, "is what passes for a full apology from Agnes Thornton." "I thought it was decent," Cole said. "It was extraordinary," Ellen said. "For her." 3 weeks passed. They were not quiet weeks. Pike's arrest had opened something in the town, not chaos, but a kind of reckoning, the slow process of a place looking at itself and deciding what it actually was and what it wanted to be. There were meetings. There were arguments. There were long conversations in the saloon and the dry goods store and at the church steps on Sunday morning, the kind of conversations that towns have when the comfortable surface of things has been disturbed enough that people have to address what's underneath. Cole kept the peace. That was officially his function, riding circuit with Hale, handling the small disputes and the boundary questions and the occasional drunk who decided the thaw in the weather was cause for celebration that the neighbors didn't share. He did it quietly, without making himself large in the way he'd always done most things. But people stopped crossing the street when they saw him coming, started nodding instead. Amos stopped him outside the livery one morning about 2 weeks in and said, "You know I never believed the Silver Creek thing." "I know," Cole said. "I should have said so sooner." "Most people don't say so at all," Cole said. "You sent for the sheriff in a blizzard. That counts for more." Amos squinted at him. "You going to stay, after everything settles?" Cole looked down the street to where the schoolhouse sat, and where he knew at this hour Ellen Reed was standing in front of 15 children and teaching them something that mattered. "Working on it," he said. Amos made a sound that indicated this was sufficient information and went back to his horses. So, the circuit judge arrived on a Tuesday 3.5 weeks after the storm. He was a compact, gray-bearded man named Whitmore, who had the air of someone who had seen every variety of human foolishness and found it professionally interesting rather than personally distressing. He reviewed the case against Edwin Pike in 2 days. Cole gave testimony. Amos gave testimony. Cassidy, whose shoulder had healed enough to allow sitting upright, gave testimony that was detailed and unflattering to his former employer. And Ellen Reed took the stand with a leather satchel of documented meeting minutes, dated letters, and carefully annotated budget records that had Judge Whitmore leaning forward in his chair within the first 10 minutes. Cole sat in the back of the room and watched her. Watched her lay it out, not with drama, not with anger, just with the clean, precise authority of someone who had prepared thoroughly and knew exactly what she was talking about. She answered every question directly. She did not embellish, and she did not soften. When Pike's hastily hired defense attorney tried to suggest she had a personal grievance that colored her account, she looked at him pleasantly and said, "I have accurate records. You're welcome to dispute any specific entry." He didn't dispute any specific entry. When it was over, Judge Whitmore called a brief recess, and people in the room turned to each other with the specific energy of people who had just watched something they'd expected to be complicated turn out to be very simple. Cole caught Ellen's eye across the room. She raised one eyebrow very slightly in a gesture that said, "Well." He nodded once in a gesture that said, "Well, indeed." Pike was convicted on 4 counts of misappropriation. He was sentenced to 5 years and removed from the town council and every position he'd ever appointed himself to. And when the bailiff walked him out of the makeshift courtroom, the sound of the room afterward was not celebration exactly, but the particular exhale of people who have been holding something tight for a long time and have finally been permitted to let it go. Tommy Brewster got his library on the first Friday in April. It wasn't large, 3 shelves, 47 books assembled from donations from 3 counties, and a small budget line that the newly reconstituted town council approved in about 10 minutes with nobody objecting. Ellen had organized it herself, categorized it, labeled everything in her clear school teacher's hand, and on the Friday morning, she let the children in to see it. Cole was there. He stood at the back of the schoolroom and watched Tommy Brewster, 12 years old, quiet, too big coat, the sharpest kid in the room, by a distance, walk up to the shelves and stand in front of them for a long moment without moving. Then the boy reached out and touched the spine of a book very carefully, the way you touch something you've wanted for a long time and can't quite believe is really there. Cole had to look at the wall for a moment. Ellen appeared beside him. She'd been watching Tommy too. She didn't say anything, and he didn't say anything, and after a moment, she found his hand beside hers and held it once briefly, and let it go before any of the children noticed. It was the first time she'd reached for him, not the last. The house outside Calverton was still for sale. Cole found out through Hale, who knew a man who knew the owner, and on the second Saturday in April, he rode out to look at it. 40 miles east. River frontage. Good land. He'd built it up in his mind for 3 years into something possibly larger than the reality, and he'd half expected to arrive and find it smaller than he'd imagined. It was not smaller than he'd imagined. It sat above the river on a low-rise, solid built with a covered porch that caught the morning sun, and a barn that needed work, but had good bones. The land ran south from the house toward the water, and in April it was soft and new. The kind of green that only happens in spring in the mountains, when everything that's been under snow for months suddenly gets the chance to be what it is. He stood in front of it for a long time. He thought about a shelf of books. He thought about coffee made strong enough to stand a spoon in. He thought about a woman who asked, "Tell me what you need me to do," and meant it, who shot a rifle with better judgment than most men he'd known, who built a case against a corrupt town official, with documented meeting minutes and a leather satchel, who held the hand of a grieving 12-year-old boy's future, with 47 donated books and a Friday morning. He thought about what home actually was, and he thought that maybe he'd understood it wrong. His whole life had been looking for a place, when what he was actually looking for was a person. He rode back to Larkspur Gulch. He found Ellen at her house, sitting at the table with a letter she'd just opened. She looked up when he came in, and something in his face told her where he'd been, because she folded the letter and set it aside and gave him her full attention. "Well," she said. "It's good land," he said. "Good house. The barn needs work, but it's sound." "How much work?" "A month if I'm working alone. Less with help." She looked at him. What kind of help are you looking for? He sat down across from her. He'd been deciding on the ride back how to say this, and he'd tried several versions, and he'd discarded all of them because they were the careful versions, the guarded versions, the versions of a man who'd spent 3 years protecting himself from hoping for too much. He was done with those versions. "I'm asking you to come with me," he said. "Not in May, now. Or as close to now as makes sense given your contract and Tommy's books and everything else. You're not willing to leave until it's finished, which I understand, and I'm not asking you to leave unfinished." He held her eyes. "I'm asking if when it is finished you'll come. Not as a courtesy. Not because the storm put us in the same cabin and it seemed practical. Because I have not been this certain about anything in 3 years, and I don't see the value in being circumspect about it." Ellen held his gaze for a long moment. Then she unfolded the letter she'd set aside and slid it across the table to him. He looked at it. It was from the county education office dated that week. It confirmed the approval of a permanent library endowment for Larkspur Gulch School District. It also offered Ellen Reed a district supervisor position, the first of its kind in the county, overseeing curriculum and library development across 6 schools. A position that could, the letter noted, be administered from any location within the district. He looked up at her. "The district includes Calverton," she said. He stared at her. "When did you—" "I wrote to them 6 weeks ago." She took the letter back. "After you told me about the house." "6 weeks ago," he said slowly. "You wrote to the county education office about a position administering from Calverton." "From within the district, yes. Before I even asked you." She met his eyes, and in them was that warmth she'd stopped suppressing a few weeks back. Not hidden anymore, not armored over, just present, just hers, just completely honest. "I made a judgment call," she said. He looked at her for a long moment. Then something in him that had been held tight for 3 years. Not just the Silver Creek rumor, not just the running, but something older and deeper, the long habit of not expecting to be met, let go, quietly, completely, like ice giving way to spring without making a production of it. "Ellen Reed," he said. "Cole Hart," she said. "I think I'd like to marry you." She didn't look away. "I think I'd like that too." "That's settled then." "That's settled," she agreed. Outside, April was doing what April did, the particular extravagant business of everything coming back after a long time under the cold. The world insisting on itself again with the specific conviction of things that know they belong. They sat at the small table in the small house that would not be her house much longer, and they did not make speeches or promises or performances of the thing between them, because it didn't need any of that. It had been built in a blizzard over 5 days of coffee and wolves and gunfire and honesty, and what's built that way doesn't require ceremony to stand. It just stands. Just. Cole reached across the table, and Ellen took his hand, and that was enough. And it was everything. And 2 people who had spent years being each other's town's idea of a cautionary tale became, in the quiet of an April afternoon, simply 2 people who had found the one thing harder to come by than survival. They had found the person who made survival worth something. And in the life they built east of there, on good land above a river, in a house with a barn that needed work, and a porch that caught the morning sun, and a shelf full of books and coffee, always strong enough to stand a spoon in, they were never outsiders again. They were each other's home, and they had chosen it. That was the whole of it, and it was enough.